So today I'm going to talk about practical R workflows, and really this has just been a little bit of my journey in setting up a consultancy and how I've smoothed out the bumps as I've gone along. So who am I? My name's Dan Wilson. You can tweet me there. You can use the conference hashtag as well. Most of my career I've worked in data in various forms. I've worked for marketing companies. I've worked for packaged goods companies. I actually started my career when the single view of the customer was the holy grail. I think we've really largely moved on now from there. But suffice to say, I have worked with data for a long time, and I've come across all manner of issues when I've worked with data. I do think of myself less of a hacker, more of a hack, but even in my moments of hackiness, I still feel as though I've made something that looks amazing. And about 10 months ago, I started my own data consultancy called the Data Collective, and I focus on helping charities to understand how their donors behave and how they can use that information to increase their fundraising efforts and improve their revenues so they can help, in turn, help more beneficiaries. So if you're just walking into the room, or you've been sitting so far through the other sessions which were probably far more insightful than mine, this will give you a bit of an idea of whether or not you should stay. If you do things that focus on repeatability, more so than reproducibility, that's a tongue-twisting word, guys, I'm glad you said it first. But if you focus on repeatability, having to do the same thing numerous times, whether that be with the same data or whether that be with different data, hopefully there'll be some things here that help you out. If you have to collaborate with people that don't use R, and when I say don't use R, I actually mean Excel. They use Excel, and it's the bane of our existence, trying to make these two talk. There'll be a tip for you in this as well. If you're new to R, first of all, welcome to the club. I'm only a fairly recent user of R, but if you're new to R, this will hopefully help give you some tips about what you can do to improve the way you work and get up to speed a little bit quicker. If you are thinking about growing your team, or you're thinking about moving jobs to lead a team working with R, then this will give you some good foundations and some good things to think about in how you're going to work with your peers. Finally, if you just need a little bit more time, because sometimes that's all we need. So really the question comes down to, when we're talking about workflows, where do we need to start? Where should we start? Do we want to think about the really big problems, what's causing us the greatest pain? Do we think about, well, let's get a quick win on the board and really get this working right for us? I've got a few key principles and tenets that I use. The first one is, it is all about the data. Certainly when I was thinking about this and how I was going to implement things for my business, given that I work in a fairly small domain, being fundraising, I have the pleasure of being able to be a little bit prescriptive in the data that I use. But I've also, having worked in fundraising for a number of years, I've got a good understanding of what my clients are likely to have available to them and what they capture about their donors and the transactions. So I took the time to think about, well, what am I likely to need on any given project? If I'm working with client A or I'm working with client B, is there some commonality between that? And taking the time to think about that and what you're going to use in your projects, whether it be a specific piece of analysis, whether it be just some data tidying and processing you need to do to help another downstream function within your organization, making sure you think consistently about what's the commonality. Once you've defined that, let your stakeholders know what that is. So for me, I have a 6-page document that I send to clients when they say, hey Dan, we want to do some work with you. I say, great, that's fantastic. I'm looking forward to starting that project with you. This is what I need. And it's very prescriptive. I take them through what format I want to see it in, what field names I want to use. The page you don't see here though, because I did say it's 6, and if you're as good as me, you can count that I'm only showing 5 pages. The 6th page is actually an FAQ that says, goodness me, what if it's all too hard? Because I know my clients, in some cases, don't have people who work with data day in and day out. It's their fundraising manager who needs to be able to get this data for us. So we need to have a little bit of flexibility. So make sure that you're prescriptive, and your clients or your co-workers will strive to meet that expectation if you've set it high, but then you can come to them a little bit and make them feel okay about the fact that they can't deliver on absolutely everything you're after. Finally, once your client's provided you that data, take the time to make it yours. Once again, this is more of a thinking process, and it gives you the opportunity to make sure you're standardizing what you receive, because remember, clients can't always provide what you need exactly how you need it. So you take the time to think about, well, I'm going to need this set of derived values across every single project I have, so I'm going to take the time to do some pre-processing on that data so it's ready for me regardless of the project I'm conducting for my peers or my clients. The other thing is, it's really worth taking the time to think about how you organise things. I'm a big advocate of convention over configuration. Naming things is one of those kind of convention ideas. Taking the time to think about, well, how do I use a particular case? Is it all lowercase? Do I use hyphens? Do I use underscores? What do I put at the start? What do I put at the end? The biggest thing for that is dates. If anyone uses a day, month, year kind of format, I would encourage you quite strongly not to anymore. Think about using a year, month, day, or the ISO standard for dates, because it just makes things searchable. Jenny Bryan has done a great paper on and a great presentation on how to name things well for machine readability. I'd encourage you to have a look at it. But the other part of that comes down to thinking about your folder structure. How are you going to consistently across projects hold your work? So I do have a little bit of a demo as well, and I'm hoping mine goes better than Peter's did. All right, everyone can... Let's mirror displays. The wonders of modern technology. Great. All right, so can everyone see this clearly? Ish. All right. So we start off, we want to think about our structures. I showed you the structure of my projects just a moment ago. At the moment, we can see on the right-hand side here, I've got a data folder, I've got a little bit of code here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set my data path. We're going to list my files in there. So I've got 2 files. One is the attendees and one is the talk presenters in this session. So we have John, Peter, Philip and myself, what we're talking about. We also have some feedback, because I'm sure someone at some point is going to ask for feedback. And this is how I thought the feedback would go back in the beginning of June. Ooh, there's a unicorn up there. But problem is I've now got some new data. So let's have a look. If we think about our folder structures, we can see there that I've used the 2018-06 to designate that it was June this year that the data was supplied. Now, if we use listers, and this is an absolute godsend for me. Listers is great. If you don't know how to use it, I'd suggest looking at the documentation, but ultimately, it's just going to list the directories under a particular path. So what's that look like? We've got 2018-06 and 2018-07. Let's just see if this makes it a bit better. Does that make it more readable? I'm hearing lots of yeses. Thanks, guys. It's great. Pardon? One more zoom. I think I might not be able to see it on my screen if I do that, but is that better? We're on a winner. Okay, great. So we can see my directories there. Now if I run this, that's going to tell me, oh, hang on. I missed a step? No, I didn't. sorry, what I'm doing here with this step of code is I'm actually taking the last element in that vector of my data path. So when we do that, now because I've structured my data in a nice format, I can get the most recent file. So next time I don't actually have to go and change this in my code. I can just run this. So when we do this, I can see we've got some new files. We've got our July files, and I can rerun the same code. Now, another piece of the value of your naming comes down to being able to use regular expressions. So we saw that there's two files in there before. One is the talks and one is the attendees or their feedback. But I only want to isolate the talk stuff. But last time our file name had a 2018-06 on it and a day on it as well. So this time I can still run that. The data stays the same for the talks because they didn't change. But my feedback is now updated because this is now after the conference when everyone's given their feedback. Just a few hints there, guys. But once again, we've got some new data, and I'll just show you what the folders look like. So if we look at what our folders are, we've got another folder there now, and that's what my new data path is going to be when I run this code. So by structuring your folders well, you can not have to worry about updating your code. You just run the same piece of code, and it points to the new location for you. So that's why I think I'm really big on naming conventions for your folders and making sure you structure things consistently, because if I run this for client 1 and then I run this for client 2, the same code works because my structures are consistent across all my projects. All right, the other thing to think about when you're wanting to refine your workflows is what's causing you friction. What's the thorn in your side every single day when you go to work and do some analysis? What's the biggest bugbear of conducting any work that you do? And this is something we'll talk in a bit more detail soon. So when we're starting to think about our workflows, we're looking at what's repetitive, what can you standardize across things, how should you name things, what's your folder structure like, and what's slowing you down. All right, so let's talk about building our skills. So when I'm only a relative new user of R, so when I started out, or this is an example flow of a project for me. So I'll receive data from a client, I'll standardize that, as I mentioned before. I'll provide that feedback to a client, usually via Excel, because that's what they use, and it's not my preference, it's their preference. Then I'll do the analysis, provide them some feedback, and then it's either zipping the outputs up if it's separate data files for them, or putting it into a presentation to present to them. Can I recommend, if you need to put stuff in a presentation, R Markdown is great. If your clients don't use that and they expect you to present or provide a deck at the end, the Officer package is an absolute amazing package. But for me, when I started doing this kind of thing, I used code snippets. I host things on GitLab, largely because they allow you to have private projects for free at the moment. So for my client stuff, I try to keep that private because it's not everyone else's business. But I started to use these snippets just to keep important pieces of code that I needed to remember. This is an example of one of loading all the RDA files in a particular folder. From there, I've found that it became a bit tedious and I had too many snippets, so I started to condense all of those into one file, and I'd call that my 99 functions file. Not because it had 99 functions, but because with my naming I like to have a numeric prefix. Although I do believe some people who do this might approach 99 functions as well. This was great, and I started using this quite consistently, and I'd take it from one project to the next, and I'd copy and paste. Sometimes I'd start to tweak something and I'd forget which was the newest version, so you can see quickly it might spiral out of control. But the real clincher for me came when I had a client who, previously I'd been dealing with smallish data sets, maybe a couple of 100,000 transactions. I had a client that came to me with 12 million transactions that I needed to be able to process. And I'd got on board with the tidyverse. I was having good crack with dplyr to manipulate things. And the readability was amazing. With 12 million records for me on my trusty laptop, it started to take a bit of a hit. So I moved to the data table package, which has been quite useful in terms of speeding things up. I don't want to debate the merits of one over the other. It's what works for you. But my problem was I had about 15 or 16 different versions of my 99 functions. And I want to try and keep things consistent, so I had to go and edit all of those. So while this is useful, it can have its own drawbacks. So I took the next step in my evolution and I wrote a package. It's not really for public consumption. I have made it publicly available if you do want to have a look at it. It really is just my hacking so I can make my life easy. I do recommend it, and I'll talk in a moment about why I think packages are a really good thing to improve your own personal workflows. If you are interested, there are a bunch of resources here worth having a look at. All of those are really quite good. Hadley's book specifically talks about how to do packages and to test them. Hilary Parker has written a good blog post on how to start out, as has Carl Broman. And RStudio are a good authority because they help make that package development workflow quite seamless. So really, really important, start at your level and build out on your skills. You can be like me, or you can just dive straight in the deep end if you really want and go straight to a package. But for me, it was about building my confidence in, and having small wins and small successes. The final part is about reducing friction. And I just want to take you through some of the pain points that I had in my day-to-day workflows and how I've solved for them. So one of my big things is quite often I need to concatenate different fields of data or different vectors of data. The paste function, while it's great and while R is a great piece of software, it does have its pitfalls at times. And you can see there, Dan N.A. Wilson is a little bit rubbish as a data output. So I'm like, well, how do I get around this? And I try all these different regexes and trying to get rid of the NAs, whether at the beginning or the middle or the end, and it was just doing my head in every single time. I finally turned to Stack Overflow and said, how do I do paste without NAs? And someone has posted a fantastic response. I think they called it paste 3. I took that, I copied it, I pasted it and called it paste NA because that's more meaningful to me about what its function in pasting is. It's okay to do that. Stack Overflow is a great resource once again. The other thing for me is I have a number of bits of data or lookup tables that I use quite consistently across my projects. So historically, before I built my package, I would have CSVs in each folder structure of what I'm doing, but I'd always forget to import them. And then I'd have to put a line of code in to import them, and it was just a bit tedious. Or if I'd updated it once to accommodate one client's request, then I might forget to apply that elsewhere if I thought that was a good idea. So for me, I wrapped those reusable bits of data into the package. So now when I load my segmenter package, those bits of data are there. So they're probably not particularly insightful to you. They're super valuable to me though. And if you've got data that you use consistently across your projects, I highly recommend you do look at using these. The next one for me is about streamlining the process. Peter mentioned a little bit about templates before. This has been an absolute godsend because even if you're using Git, you can't always fork a project. So for me, one of the things that I did was I took the time to really understand how something like the use this package works, If you haven't heard of it, it's worth exploring. It can streamline things quite dramatically for you. Where are we at? So I have this, this is one of the functions. It's probably a bit tricky to, oh, hang on. Let me change that for you. Here we go. So I have a piece of code here for my function that I've created that will basically spin up a job for me instantaneously with a single line of code. That's what it looks like at the moment. When I run it, it creates a bunch of directories. It takes a template and creates a file for it. Let's see what it actually does in reality. It gives a bunch of warnings first of all, because I really don't care about those warnings about having something on the end of the line. I tried to figure it out, but it all got too hard. And when it's your own package, that's actually okay. It does put in a bunch of stuff into my git ignore. So things like, tilde XLS files, I don't want to commit those. So it gets rid of a bunch of stuff. But all my folders are there, ready to use and ready to go for me. So I'd encourage you to take the time to look at something like that and see how it might be applicable to your workflow. Finally is being able to export data out of R. It's super hard at times, particularly if you drop some data to the console and you try and copy it out. It doesn't copy cleanly. If you put it into Excel, you've got to take it and put it into, you've got to use the format the data or split into columns. I wanted to overcome this. I saw on Twitter someone mention that you can write out to the clipboard, and I'm like, ooh, that sounds great. Let's see if I can make that into a function. The final test for today, let's see if this works. So that's what, let's do this again. So this is what one of my small data sets looks like over on the screen there. I have one that is 721 rows long. It looks a bit like that, not particularly easy, and it truncates when you look at it from the console. So how do we get that out? We do this, and I learned the lesson of making things pipeable, because that's super good as well. And there is my data set pasted straight out of R into Excel. For me, this is super valuable because my clients all want to use Excel. And I do know you can write to Excel, but sometimes I'm overwriting values that were there previously. So this is something that sped up my workflow. So finally, on building solutions to your common problems, it's about limiting the manual intervention. Make those objects that you use regularly accessible, whether that's some data or a function. Reduce your repetition and simplify integration with your other tools that you do use. So my 3 key takeouts, that workflows do require a little bit of thought, and take the time to think about how you want to work. Start at your level and build the skills. And finally, reduce your friction. Any questions? I think we've probably got time for one because I went over. No time? See me after the break.